Hello and welcome to the Global Travel Channel podcast show. I'm your host, Mark Philpott, and if you are a regular listener to the show, welcome back. It's great to have you with me again. Your loyalty is gratefully appreciated to the show, and I hope you're telling as many people as you can about this particular podcast. If you're a first timer with us, welcome. It's great to have you on board. You have a lot of episodes to catch up on. You can simply do that by going over to the website at globaltravelchannel.com. And you can download the podcast as well from places like Apple iTunes under the podcast section, Stitcher, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Play, even from the Global Travel Channel Patreon page that we now have. So there's lots of options and no excuses to get hold of this podcast show. Now, every now and again, I do a bonus episode, and today is a bonus episode. In fact, it's an episode where I was invited onto another podcast as a guest. So this show is thankfully done by the guys over at the Traveller's Blueprint podcast. That's Elliot and Bob, who do a great job over there in the United States on their travel podcast. And they invited me a little while ago onto their show to talk about some of my travel experiences. Now, there's one particular topic in this podcast episode that I think is very important for people to consider when they're traveling, and it's something that most people don't even focus on. So you're going to have to listen to this episode to check it all out, and let's get into it. Let's go over and meet Bob and Elliot.
Mark, welcome to the Traveler's Blueprint.
Thanks, guys. It's great to finally catch up with you both. I've been watching you both intensely online and listening to your podcast episode, so it's good to see you both, Bob and Elliot.
Good to see you too, and thank you for
great
listening.
To have you on.
And as far as we understand, you have a podcast, a travel podcast of your own that is currently at 90 episodes. Now, how long have you been doing that for?
I've only been going for 6 months. So I started from ground zero like everybody does, and spent all my time stressing about what kind of microphone I should buy and what kind of software I should use for editing and how the heck am I going to do this editing by myself. And oh, by the way, I live on a sailboat. So is this even going to be possible to do this from a sailboat? Yeah. So,
and that's where you're recording from right now. You're off the coast of Brisbane, Australia.
Yeah, I am.
With a storm rolling in.
I'm sitting in the Coral Sea. So if I go under in a few minutes, guys, send out the SOS.
It's recorded.
Now, just very quick before we jump into the episode, I do want to just bring up the fires in Australia seem to be incredibly intense right now. The coverage has been, it's pretty horrible. It seems like it's incredibly devastating to the wildlife. To people are losing their lives and their homes. Can you see the smoke? Have you had any experience with the wildfires, or are you at a distance to where it hasn't impacted you in any way?
Look, I really want to thank you for bringing that up, because I wanted to talk about that as well today, because here we are on a Monday morning down here in Australia. You guys are still enjoying Sunday evening over there in the United States. And, for the past few weeks, Australia has been going through something that's been unprecedented really in its history when it comes to bushfires. The size and the magnitude of these things is just uncomprehendable, really, because you're talking about a total area is about 3/4 of the size of North America that's currently on fire. And
wow,
we've had hundreds of thousands of people that have been affected. We've had many deaths now. We've had people that are lost everything out of their lives, not only their homes, but all of those things that we have in our homes that we take for granted of being there every day, like all the memories that we keep and all the things that mean something to us as individuals. So it's been a very somber time down here, and it's something that's really affected the nation. But also, when a nation's down and it's hurting, that's when people become their strongest. So there's been some incredible acts of bravery. There's been incredible acts of compassion. There was a local comedian yesterday who started a GoFundMe page, and she's raised $20 million in the last 48 hours to help these bushfire victims. So, whenever you have tragedies like this, incredibly inspiring stories come out of it. But at the moment, it's a very dark place. And thankfully, to answer your question, I'm nowhere near the place where the bushfires are at the moment. It's well south of me, probably about 2,000 miles away, in fact. So it's quite a long way away. So in terms of, we have had bushfires up here. So in terms of smoke haze and all of that, it's been lingering around now for the last month. We've had these extreme temperatures in Australia.
Wow. And
Yeah.
I mean, the photos that have come out of it are just harrowing.
Yeah, it's getting up right up to the Sydney, correct? Is that correct?
It is, yeah. It's got
Okay.
right up to if you know Australia very well at all, it's got up to the New South Wales border, and right up to the main city areas. Hasn't got into Sydney yet, which is very thankful. But regardless of that, there's a lot of people across the rural areas of the country that have been completely devastated and wiped out.
Yeah.
Right. So that's something that I think Americans don't realize, that the size of Australia, you're almost the same size as the continental United States.
Mhm.
Yeah,
And like you mentioned, what, 3/4 of your country
yeah.
is now
Yeah,
burning, essentially.
yeah,
So that's
absolutely.
almost, I mean, you could almost say that it's the equivalent to, I don't know, half the United States would
Yeah.
be on fire, and that's kind of puts it in perspective a little bit. It's
That's
mind-boggling.
that's that's very hard to imagine, though, isn't it? The half of the
Oh
United States
man,
on fire.
yeah,
Like, you have your Californian bushfires, which are terrible as well, and those things that we've seen down here recently. But this is a magnitude that just is very difficult to understand how big it is.
right.
Yeah.
And of
Well,
course, with such a smaller population, we don't have the resources available like the United States does to be able to, I guess, be proactive in these situations. So there's a lot of the fires that are being left out of control and just burning because we don't have the resources to be able to put in retainment lines and all those sorts of things that are required.
yeah.
Right. Yeah, I know the land mass is almost the same size, but I think you have like 20 million people or something.
Yeah.
Whereas, yeah, we're at about 350 million.
Yeah. Well, I hope
So
that
how
it is
about
resolved.
I think let's take a positive step in this podcast show today. And for those people that are affected, let's give them a little bit of light and a bit of hope and a bit of laughter and see whether we can put some smiles on some faces, yeah, to do good in the world.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. So let's just talk travel. Why don't you explain to our guests what you've been up to, what you're focusing on right now as far as travel goes?
Yeah, thanks for asking. Look, I think in terms of the whole global travel channel that I started was it took me by surprise. It wasn't something that I'd been planning for a long time. And in fact, one of my closest friends said to me, "Why don't you start a podcast show? You've been a keynote speaker for a long time. You've been around the world to many, many countries, and you've got a lot of things that you can talk about." And I said, "Well, I don't want it to be about me. I want to talk about other people's travel experiences because, as we all know, travel is such a amazing thing to experience, and it affects all of us in a different way. We all have, even we can go to the same place and yet have such a vastly different travel experience. So I wanted to hear stories from other people about how they've changed their life, so to speak, in terms of their travel experience. And I also wanted to create a platform where eventually this can turn into actually changing other people's lives beyond the podcast. So that's why I started the Global Travel Channel. So the podcast is, I guess, step number one in this vision that I have to do good, give back in the world, make a difference, but using travel as the core essence of that model, if you like. And that's what I've started in the Global Travel Channel.
Yeah, it's kind of awesome. I mean, over the last 6 months, it seems like you had some amazing guests on, all with incredible stories. So why don't we kind of dive into that? I mean, what do most of your guests what do you look for? It looks like your latest episode was a travel coach, and she had visited several countries, as in 80, which is more than several. And she's only 22.
Wow.
Well, Bob, if I know you're up to 11 and Elliot's up to 18 countries visited, so you guys have
Yes.
got some traveling to do, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
we do.
we have a lot of. Well, that's the thing. The reason we started this podcast is because we kind of settled down a little bit, and this is our way of keeping up with travel, living vicariously through the people that we find interesting, and maybe we would have met during our travels. Now we just have to do it through our homes, and that's filling the gap for me. I know, I'm pretty sure it's
Yeah.
filling the gap for Elliot.
It is. And we're hoping to inspire the next generation of travelers.
Right, big time.
Well, one of the questions I had for you guys today was, and I pulled this off your website as a random piece, and I thought, right, I'm going to ask them, why can't you quit your job and leave your family and go travel?
Well, we've contemplated it.
Yeah, Elliot and I might run away together. You never know. Yeah, well, the way that I'm looking at it, I like the balance. I'm trying to live a life of balance, and and I'm figuring that I can get to at least one country every year for the rest of my life. Hopefully, that's the goal. That's the goal. That's like the minimum. And I'm 32. That's a decent amount of countries. I can hit a few more countries between now and when I die of old age at 115 in my bed.
the ripe young age of 115.
Right.
Yeah. And I'd say
I really like that approach, because I think that and this is one of the things that I guess witnessed in talking to a lot of my guests, is that I think we're getting a bit too hung up about how many countries we've actually visited and how important that is, and all this sort of stuff. Because if you go to a particular destination and that has a life-changing impact on you, it doesn't matter if you don't go to another country in your entire life. If that particular experience made you into a better human being, that you're able to go home and live your life in a way that's more compassionate, more loving, more supportive, and better for the world, then that one travel experience has done the thing. So yeah, hats off to all these people that have been to tens and hundreds of countries. But travel to me is all about making the most of that experience, whether it be one or whether it be 100.
Yeah, and I would absolutely agree with that, and even if it's not to a different country, even if it's within your own town or your own state, or if you're outside of the United States, your own province.
Yeah.
Because I find value in just traveling to New York.
Yeah, that's a really nice point, because a bit like Australia, because you guys live in a vast a country that has lots of vast distances, people struggle sometimes going from one coast to the other, and they look at I guess the easier option. It might be to get on a plane and go down to Florida, or go to Cuba or somewhere like that. But in Australia, we have the same issue here, is that people, a lot of people haven't been to the other side of Australia to check out what's there.
Yeah, and we've actually talked to several people from Australia, and most of them are like, yeah, I've actually never really traveled in Australia.
It was mind-boggling to me. Yeah, I mean, we had Leah on. She's a young girl. She's traveled all over the world. And we brought up, now I'm drawing a blank, Ayers Rock?
Ayers Rock, yeah. Ayers Rock.
Ayers, yeah. And she had never been there.
Never have been, no.
Yeah. It was mildly interesting, only in the fact that most of them are either based in Sydney or on the West Coast, and had never. Sydney's east, and then other people like Perth and Melbourne. That's all West Coast, right?
No, Melbourne's. Yeah. I thought Melbourne's East Coast too.
Melbourne's Southeast Coast, yeah.
Okay, and they just hadn't been to the opposite side,
right?
Yeah, and they hadn't even been to Tasmania, or even New Zealand.
Yeah, there you go. Which is an even better country still, because that's where I'm from. Well, let me ask you this, guys. Have you been to Boise, Idaho?
No, I have never. I don't know if I've ever set foot in Idaho.
Oh, I have. I've been to 36 of the 50 states.
Okay, well, that's great.
Yeah, I'm getting there. Yeah, there's a few that some that I don't know why I'd ever travel to. I'm sorry if you're from like Nebraska right now and you're listening. Shoot me an email and tell me what I need to go see in your state. But and there are some that are very high on my list that I just haven't gotten to yet. Alaska is a big one, and it's just very hard to get to. I can get to Italy for much cheaper than I can go to Alaska.
And that's the same issue in Australia as well. It's very expensive to fly and travel domestically in Australia versus hopping off to Bali or New Zealand or somewhere like that.
Bob, I'm going to challenge you on that Alaska, because I'm pretty sure you can get to Alaska for like $700 round trip right now.
But you can get to Italy for 3, 4, 5 round trip.
Was that 300, 400?
Between 3 and 5. You can go from Philadelphia to Rome for between 300 to 500, which is like the average cost.
So Elliot, where was that price to? Alaska from where?
Philly.
So
Alaska's $700 right now.
Yeah, and there's from Philly to Juneau, there's a round trip which has one layover for $477.
That's another thing. You have to have a layover to go to Alaska.
That's true.
Philly, right? So I'm flying direct to Rome. Europe, we're in a perfect spot. The East Coast is in a perfect spot to fly to Europe. Really nowhere else.
I can fly from Brisbane to LA at the moment for $600 US return.
Wow.
Is that Google flights?
No, that's just on any of the online
okay.
travel sites. So
Yeah.
That puts it in perspective, I guess, when you're talking about international versus and long haul international versus domestic.
Yeah.
But
It's
you're
like
in the
if you're going
perfect
to take the time
location.
to fly, you might as well just go somewhere completely
Well,
different.
you're in the perfect location to enjoy Southeast Asia, which for us, it takes us 24 hours to get there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, guys, I'm interested in a couple of things about you and your podcasting journey so far. First of all,
Sure.
how did you guys come together to do a podcast show, and why did you choose podcasting as the medium of getting your message out there?
You want me to take it, or you?
That is a great question.
Yeah.
Yeah, Bob, why don't you take that one?
Well, Elliot and I met at work. We worked for an engineering company. Elliot is a landscape architect, and I am an environmental scientist. So our professions clashed. We met in Manhattan on a project together, where we were out of separate offices. Met on a project in Manhattan, had to work there for 2 weeks. Kind of hit it off. Just have a lot of similar interests: travel, nightlife. I mean, we ended up going out and hanging out in Manhattan. We got the idea because we both just enjoy travel. Our first idea, though, was to write a travel guidebook.
Yes.
Right. So we started writing this book on how to plan travel, and we broke it down into several categories. Online resources, how to navigate cities, how to be an efficient traveler when you're in a location. But then podcasting came into our minds. It's an expanding platform. People are absorbing their information this way at an incredibly high rate. It's constantly growing. You're free to do what you want. You don't need to coordinate with a publisher or upload it to a platform that's going to require, I don't know, certain things. They're going to have to edit your book. And the process is just much easier, and you can still reach a ton of people this way. We're kind of free to do this at our own free will. We get on the people that we want to talk to. We do what interests us. There's no one telling us what to do, how to do it. We just kind of do. And we have full creative
Liberties.
Yeah. And that's...
Guys, I've just got to close this hatch because the storm's come.
Yeah,
Right.
Go for it. We'll put it on hold. Was there anything else, Elliot, that I should have added to that? Or
Yeah, I'll add.
Yeah.
I'll wait till he comes back, though.
Yeah. It's closing the hatch. This is our first podcast with a guy on a boat.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah, we're ticking things off here. We've hit every continent. We've had a podcast with someone on every continent except Antarctica. Right?
Yeah, we have.
We've hit every continent now, so that's pretty impressive. Go ahead.
It is.
You're back.
Sorry about that.
All good.
One thing that I'll add to that, Bob, is since the format, at least, not necessarily that Bob and I are experts in travel and that we know all of the tricks of the trade. And that is why we do the interview-based format, because we have traveled a little bit. We know that there's more knowledge out there, and that's why we try to bring people in that have a little bit more experience in certain realms. And then we both have a passion for, the environment, sustainability, and just culture in general. So having those that have their own projects that are tied into travel is really important to our just format and the overall Traveler's Blueprint community.
Yeah.
And did you find the art of podcasting an easy concept to pick up in terms of managing the technical aspect of it and putting all that together in terms of editing and all the rest of it?
I was completely new to audio. I wouldn't say completely new. My job requires a lot of software knowledge of like the Adobe suite. So I have some experience in editing. So it wasn't too hard to transition into it. But the amount of time it takes to edit, you kind of figure out what you want to edit out of an episode. So when I say or when Bob says or when you say that we try to cut out as much as possible to make you, the guest, sound phenomenal and make Bob and I sound a little bit more intelligent.
At this point, I don't even care that I say it. I'm trying to consciously remove it, but I know I say it all the time. It's hard. It's hard to do. And I don't notice it until I go back and listen to these episodes where I'm like, man, I say way too much.
I know you think you're not saying it, but we do. And the other thing that it was fairly easy to do the podcast format because Bob and I are both very conversational. We like learning. and we like talking to people about their experiences, about their past, and what they want to do and what their ideals are. So having you on is a great way. And I don't think we've actually ever really discussed this with anyone. We had our episode, Caesar, there it was, 000, which was just the beginning. And it was only a 2-minute segment about what the podcast is, but it didn't talk about why we formed it or how we plan on seeing it grow.
I think it's a valid point. And the reason I asked you is because I actually get my guest asking me, why did I start the podcast show and what was my journey to get there? Because they want to put some context and relevance, I guess, to who's this guy they're talking to? How much does he know about travel? How much has he seen of the world? What kind of questions can I expect to get from this guy? So I found that quite interesting. So that's why I asked, and I think a lot of people would be appreciative of you sharing how you came together on that.
Yeah, it's funny. A lot of our guests have asked us, but it's never been on air. It's usually either before the episode or after the episode.
Right. Yeah.
You are groundbreaking today, guys.
It is.
Well, let me take that question and turn it right back around. What about you? How did you end up podcasting? I know you have a ton of travel experience. And if you could, before you answer the question, can you just tell us about some of your travel experiences and maybe how it eventually,
Maybe that will answer the question.
Yeah, how it eventually turned into a travel podcast.
Well, I've been fortunate enough through my life to have, I'm 54 years old, and I've had a lot of different types of travel experiences. So when I was a young guy, I was a professional sportsman. So I was able to travel the world doing something that I was extremely passionate about and loving as a career. And you obviously see the world through different eyes by doing that. You don't travel mainstream as a sports person. Your dedication and focus doesn't allow you necessarily to have the time available to explore cities in a way that you would like to when you're there. So you travel from a hotel to a tennis stadium, you play your matches, you probably get knocked out in the first round like I did, and you're on the next plane out of town, right? So that doesn't allow you to see a lot of places, but I could tick off a lot of places that I said I've been to by doing that. The next phase of my life was in the corporate sector, and I worked for a multinational company, which was the world's largest logistics company. So I had an amazing opportunity over the course of a 22-year career to travel everywhere in the world, basically, doing business. And again, the corporate sector allows you, I guess, from a cost perspective, to travel a lot easier because you're not paying for it out of your own pocket, which is significant, of course. You're staying in relatively nice hotels everywhere you go. Someone's booking your airline tickets for you. So it's another type of travel experience. And I got to do that for many, many years. So I went to countries and cities and villages and townships that I would never have chosen probably in my entire life if I had not had that experience through the business world. Yeah. And then post the business world, I left and I started my own international not-for-profit organization. And at the time I was living in Singapore, and I had a focus of the majority of the projects that I was creating with my team were across Indochina. So I got to spend a lot of time in that part of the world. And again, seeing it in a way that I would never have seen it before if I was a professional sports person or if I was a business traveler, because I was in a lot of rural areas that were very poor, stricken and in need of help. And that's why we were there doing that type of work. And it opened my eyes again to a whole different form of traveling. But I also want to say that during that journey that I've had over the 40 years that I've been really traveling the world, it's the people you meet in these places through those experiences. So you can imagine in the corporate world, you're meeting a lot of business people. They're stressed. They're going from meeting to meetings. They're trying to deal with family issues back on the other side of the world. They're under pressure to deliver results. So you have a different type of interaction with those people when you're in that world. As a sports person, you're around a bunch of like-minded people that are trying to achieve the same goal, which is to be the best in their particular chosen sporting profession. So there's a lot of competition in that world. And not everybody ends up being your friend, because the guy that's maybe sharing a bunk bed with you is the guy that wants to knock you off the tennis court the next day, in my case, right? And then in the non-profit world, it's all about budget and saving money and doing things very cheaply because you want to maximize your your donor and funding support the best way you possibly can. So you're not staying in 5-star hotels and traveling first class everywhere. You're taking rickshaws and tuk-tuks, and in a lot of cases jumping on the back of a motorbike with 3 other people, and you're trying to really be mindful of how you're spending the money. So over the course of all those years, I think that travel has enriched my life through all those different types of traveling experiences I've had the opportunity to do, and now living on a sailboat and producing my podcast show from a sailboat gives me another life traveling experience that I probably would never have thought of doing 20 years ago or even 2 years ago, to be honest with you.
I mean, you're literally living on a mode of transportation.
Yeah. And I woke up this morning and I was thinking about coming on the show with you guys, and I was thinking, how cool is it that I can wake up in my house? I've got $1 million water views outside my window here that I don't have to pay a cent for. And I can take my home anywhere in the world thanks to the wind and the sun. And I think that's just such a cool concept.
It really is. I've always loved the idea of, living on a boat, and just never have.
Yeah. And Bob, I want to go back to something Bob said earlier, because it really resonated with me. And he talked about having balance in life. And I think balance to us as individuals can be very different in the way that we seek that balance. And, I don't have a family around me. I have my little puppy dog, and him and I are soulmates, and he's my wingman, and we do everything together.
He seems like a good wingman.
He's a great wingman. And, but in the same breath, I would say I have an extraordinary amount of balance in my life. And I love podcasting. Like you guys, I'm hungry for learning and information and talking to people and going deep into a conversation where you find out something about somebody that really makes them think about themselves a bit more. That's what I love about the podcasting experience.
Yeah. Well, and not only the podcasting experience, but that's the main reason I travel. I love seeing new places, but I love meeting new people more in those places than anything else. Some of my favorite trips have been ones where I've traveled to a new place and met some incredible people that we end up hanging out and had not known each other prior to that trip.
It's a hunger to learn. It's this hunger, like, for curiosity. You're just curious. And that's why we enjoy travel. And that's why we're doing this podcast. That's why we're meeting new people and talking to new people. But I want to put your travel into perspective for some of our listeners. When you say you're well-traveled, you've been to 185 countries. That's a lot. I mean, I just finished this book where a guy, he hit every country in the world. It took him 50 years. I think his name was Albert Podell. It's a really good book. I listened to it on Audible.
Mm-hmm.
I think he did it in like the 70s and 80s. And I don't know how many, there's, in the mid 190s, I'm sure, whatever the UN decided to identify as countries back then. But you've been to 185 countries. And so I really want to make sure that on this podcast, we pick your brain a little bit and we hear some of your favorite travel stories, and just to get general travel advice, because if anybody has it, it's you. And I just want to ask you, it's a really hard question, but to answer in a podcast, but what advice would you provide to someone who is maybe aspiring to travel the world, who wants to see 185 countries? Where do they start, and what do they expect to gain from that?
I think you hear what I'm about to say from every guest that you probably talk to on your show, and that is get out of your comfort zone. And I truly believe that it's when you have the ability inside yourself to get out of your comfort zone as far as you possibly can, that's when the magic is really going to happen. So when you ask me about my most incredible travel experiences, and across those whole different, I guess, decades of my life that I've just explained to you previously about those experiences, I could probably pull a few out of each one of those experiences that had a life-changing impact on me. And one that comes to mind was, and this is quite a funny one, so I thought I'd bring up something a little bit humorous today to share with you guys and your listeners, but also in hindsight, it was a life-threatening situation for me at the time. So I was living in Singapore at the time, and I just met a new lady in my life, and it was our first date. And I thought, right, I'm going to impress her by taking her on an incredible travel experience, because I thought if I can get her out of her comfort zone, then chances are she's going to see me as a great guy and we're going to have a good chance at a relationship. At the time, I had a motorcycle and I decided that I would take her on a motorcycle adventure. Now, I was impressed, first of all, by the young lady in question, because she accepted the challenge, and she said, without even knowing me, that she would get on the back of my motorcycle and we would go across into Malaysia, across the Singapore Causeway for the weekend. Anyway, it is a long story, so I'm going to keep it short. So we basically got to the place where we were staying. I did the gentlemanly thing and had booked 2 beautiful hotel rooms, one for her and one for me. And I told her that we would meet up in the morning for a walk along the beach. We got up the next morning, we walked along the beach, and it was quite surreal. It was one of those magical moments out of a Hollywood movie where there's a young couple walking along, and I was young back then, young couple walking along the beach, palm trees, white sand, turquoise colored water. And she reached out and she held my hand and we were walking along the beach. And I could have just died and gone to heaven right then because I achieved my goal. But she said to me, why don't we go for a swim? And I said, that's a great idea. So we ended up jumping into the water. And like most males of some ego at the time, I took on the challenge to swim out about 200 meters off the shore to impress her that I had a good swimming stroke and to then invite her to come into the water. By the time she got into the water, I had actually been bitten by a venomous sea snake. And what had turned out to be a wonderful opportunity for a first date ended up in a chaotic, life-saving challenge, which saw her rescue me and take me back to the hotel where I was staying, and then rushing me by car back to Singapore on a 5-hour journey into emergency ward of a hospital where I stayed for the next 12 days fighting for my life.
Wow.
So what came out of that travel experience for me? Well, a couple of great things came out of that travel experience. And even though it was a life-threatening experience, the thing that came out of it was I'd met this wonderful new person in my life who ended up being my partner for a number of years. And we had an incredible journey, and we had an incredible first date that we could always talk about that connected us as a couple. And I saw all the amazing qualities in her that day where she went beyond the call of duty to make sure that I didn't die. So that was something extraordinary through a travel experience that I actually had the opportunity to experience. And then on top of that, I got to understand the medical capabilities in certain countries that I was in at the time.
Oh, yeah.
And this is a really big thing that we don't think about when we travel. So if I was going to give anybody a piece of advice today about travel, is no matter where you go in the world, and it can be me getting on a plane going to New York City tomorrow, check out to make sure you understand what the medical support process is in the country that you're traveling to. And always have that information on hand. So before you pack anything else into a suitcase or a backpack or any part of your other travel planning, have a contingency plan if something goes wrong. Because I've been in 2 plane crashes in my life and all that travel that I've done. I've had motorcycle accidents where I've ended up in hospitals, having operations in strange countries that I never thought I'd be testing out their medical facilities. And to me, that's where something could have gone terribly wrong if I hadn't made all those calculations beforehand. So my number one piece of advice for any traveler is to make sure that you have either a medical evacuation plan in place when you're traveling. And it doesn't matter whether you're going for a weekend or overnight. As soon as you leave home and you travel somewhere, you are in the lap of the gods of accidents, of Mother Nature, of human intervention. And we a lot of the times we don't even think about this. We're more worried about what food we're going to eat, if the swimming pool is going to be big enough at the hotel and the resort, how am I going to get an Uber from the airport to my hotel? These are all the things that we think about. But to me, if something goes wrong, that's when you need to have your plans in place.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on that? Like, what exactly should someone note for as part of their medical
like nearby
contingency plan.
hospitals, or like strictly, do you have to pay for it, or is there a healthcare plan in place? Do you actually carry health insurance, like worldwide health insurance coverage?
Yeah, absolutely. And
Okay.
this is another important thing to do. I don't know if you ask your listeners actually who travel all the time, whether they've got insurance and what type of insurance they've got and how does it cover them when they're in each country that they're visiting, or even if it does cover them when they're in the country, depending on the experience that they're planning. Because a lot of insurance companies will not cover you if you're going to be doing something along the extreme sports line and putting yourself at potential risk. I know of a couple of insurance organizations that won't even cover you if you fly on a certain airline that has a very bad reputation in Africa. So these are all things that you need to look at. Now, what I've done is I've actually joined with my credit card organization, and I've actually worked with them to build a portfolio of travel insurance that suits my needs. So I sat down with their insurance people and said, right, this is the amount of coverage I want for my trips wherever I go in the world. And you talk about being on a boat and all those sorts of things. So I have a policy today that covers me from a customization point of view through my credit card company. So I make sure that I do all of my bookings and everything through my credit card organization, and then they make sure that they cover me and give me the best possible deal that I can get. And also the medical treatment. So it's aligned with the best kind of, or best level of medical care that I can get in the country that I'm traveling to.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
The only time I've really considered health insurance, well, I know I had to get it for Tanzania. I was in Tanzania for 6 weeks, and part of the trip required health coverage. Similarly, I was in Germany for 4 months, also required health coverage. The one thing that I regret not doing now, looking back on it, was Bob and I's trip to Peru. And I don't think we had any kind of health coverage plan in place.
Nothing.
And less than 6 months after that, I was traveling with my family into Long Island in I forget what, the Hamptons for a wedding. And I woke up and found out that I had a collapsed lung. And luckily, that was in the United States, but it was still not near the hospital that is in network. So, I mean, health coverage in and of itself can be very frustrating, but knowing you're covered it's just a peace of mind thing.
That's a United States problem.
It is a United States problem. That's true.
Yeah.
But I challenge you guys to ask your guests that come on your show from now on whether or not they've taken into account their travel health situation.
Yeah.
Because I would say that I would put money on it. They're probably high up of 80% haven't got the right type of coverage they need for where they're going to go.
Yeah.
And you've got to think about things like if you need to get shots to go to certain countries and you haven't got those shots and you end up with a problem, that's where it all starts to fall over. So again, when we travel, we have this rush of adrenaline. We're so excited about where we're going and what we're going to do, and we plan all of these other things. And I think families are better at doing it than what maybe couples and single people are, because families have to look after their children. They're very mindful of making sure that a lot of those things in place. But I know that a lot of backpackers, a lot of solo travelers have not done their due diligence when it comes to looking at medical care.
Yeah, I would agree with that. One of our early podcast episodes was with the honeymoon couple.
Honey Trek.
And they have been traveling for 7 or 8 years. They're one of the first travel bloggers to actually, make a career out of it and continue to travel. And we did ask them that question about healthcare coverage. And they said that for the most part, they have some coverage outside the United States, but they considered themselves young and healthy, and anything major that would happen, they had partially covered, but then they would go back to the United States for routine checkups.
Yeah.
It
doesn't cover emergencies and accidents. I mean, if they were in a situation where they would have to be operated on in another country, then they could be in trouble. When I was in Thailand, I was with a group, and a lot of the people that I was with ended up either staying in Thailand or going on to another country within Southeast Asia. I came home, but I stayed in touch with a lot of them And one of the girls that I was with ended up going to Bali, and she was riding a moped, and she ended up in a horrible moped accident in Bali. Her family is from like LA or San Diego, somewhere in Southern California. And she ended up in the hospital, and she was in the hospital for a long time, a few weeks, I think. And she ended up having to get surgery in Bali. And I didn't talk to her about the details. I don't know how she was covered or if she had insurance. I don't think she did. But you never know when it's going to happen, just like home. I don't know if some people think that, I mean, myself included, you're going on vacation and you're not really worried about getting into a car accident or the having something severe happen to me. I've seen it. I've been on trips where I've seen other people get hurt. When I was in Croatia on my honeymoon, we did a boat tour, and we were just stepping off the boat back onto the dock when we were all done. And this guy, the boat was kind of, you know how they just, they drift back and forth. And as he was stepping off, the boat kind of drifted away just a few inches, but to the point where he missed the dock. He fell into the water and hit the rocks and ended up getting sea urchins stabbing him all throughout his leg. It's pretty bad. And funny. So no, it wasn't. I mean, so I didn't know it was severe at first, and I kind of laughed when he first did it. And then we like pulled him out of the water. And I was like, oh man, this is actually serious. So we ended up leaving him. He was fine. We ended up running into him the next day in Dubrovnik, and we talked to him, and he said it was an absolute mess figuring out where the hospital was. The hospital was kind of just like blew him off. We were in Hvar, which is a tiny island off of the coast of Croatia. So the hospital there just wasn't very good. They didn't really pay any attention to him from what he said. Like they just kind of brushed him off. He had to wait until he got back to Dubrovnik and then got better medical coverage. But if he had a plan in place and if he knew what he had to do in the event of an emergency, it probably would have went much better. And so I'm glad we had this conversation, because it's honestly, this is something that I haven't, as someone who prides himself on being a good planner, hasn't put a lot of planning into what could happen in a situation.
I think you need to update your itineraries.
I think I do too. So, I mean, I'm currently planning a trip right now, and I have a 2-year-old, and I'm going with a family, and it just jumped to priority. And so thank you. It's an incredible point, and something that we have not really discussed on this podcast yet.
No. I didn't want to bring doom and gloom to the show about travel, but I think in terms of, I listen to a lot of other podcast travelers and people being interviewed on podcasts about traveling, and my own guests as well. And no one ever brings up the subject of medical support and medical planning, and it can turn your travel experience into something that's unforgettable in a negative way if you haven't planned for that. It could even put you off traveling for the rest of your life if it's something really severe, right? So another story I'll quickly share is just 2 weeks ago, a sailboat pulled up next to me here in Australia. A lovely couple from the United States, from San Francisco, who have been sailing around the world for the last 9 years together. They're in their early 60s. He had a heart attack one night on his boat right here in Brisbane, and has ended up in hospital, and they're unable to continue their journey. They've got a beautiful 55-foot sailing vessel that's now tied up here. The lady can't manage it by herself. She's got no contingency plan in place. He's got severe heart problems that he may never overcome. And their life has gone from one of being in balance and euphoria of traveling the world, sailing together, to now being an absolute disaster. So I tell you, you could do a podcast show every day of the year, and you could invite a guest on that's had some kind of medical issue when they've been traveling. And you could do that for the next 10 years, because I know there's a lot of people out there that have had lots of, you talked about the Bali scooter experience. That happens every day in Bali with Australians. So just be really mindful of putting that action into place before you go traveling with you and your family.
Absolutely. Yeah. The one thing that my wife and I have not had a chance to travel internationally much, if at all, together. Our first trip was going to be to Iceland, but she is much better than I am at planning for healthcare, probably because she works in healthcare. But when we went to Peru, she was like, make sure you have your vaccines, make sure there's no Zika. I was like, all right, done. And that was not even on my radar.
Yeah. I would go down to another level where you know the emergency number in the country that you're actually going to, so you can actually dial somewhere. You know the interpretation services so that you can get translation if you're in a foreign speaking country and you can't speak the language. The key words about getting an emergency evacuation from wherever you are, that you understand what those words are that you need to use in the language where you're going. Because there could be an opportunity where you're actually isolated, you might be by yourself. And this could be something as simple as being in a city and going for a walk to the top of a cliff and having an accident and you might be only 5 minutes out of a major city somewhere, but if you have an accident and you break your ankle and you can't walk and you've only got your mobile phone to help you out, then you need to be able to know who you call and how you get that support that you require.
Right. Yeah. Well, I want to, we only usually do an hour, and I want to make sure that we touch up on your travels, and we could talk about healthcare this entire time. But what I really want to make sure that we talk about your project that you're planning, the Great Loop Project, the Great Loop Boating Project. Do you mind explaining what that is?
Yeah, right. So I think there's a lot of people, even in the United States of America, that don't know what the Great Loop is. So
I didn't.
Not only for your listeners, but for all your international listeners as well. I came across the Great Loop probably about 2.5 years ago when I was doing some YouTube surfing one night, looking at obviously boating stuff, and I came across this incredible maritime journey that is the Great Loop. It's a 6,000-mile journey on the eastern states of the United States that starts off basically in Florida, goes up through the intracoastal waterways. And if you don't know what the intracoastal waterways is, this is a channel system that was built after the Second World War by the US Army and Navy to move a lot of their military equipment around without having to go out into the main Atlantic Ocean. And that intracoastal basically runs all the way up to New York City. So you can go from Florida on the east coast of the United States, if you're looking at a map of America, on the east coast, all the way from Florida up to New York City and the Hudson River without even going out into the ocean for very long. There's one point where you have to go around Cape May up at New Jersey, but you can go straight into the Hudson River.
Elliot, I'm sorry to cut you off. Elliot, when we were in Florida together on our layover, when we had dinner, or I'm sorry, was it lunch? That waterway that we were looking at?
Yeah. Was that an intercoastal?
That was part of the intercoastal.
Oh, interesting.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah. I'm looking at the map now. It's kind of cool.
There's a very interesting history behind it. Yeah. They essentially wanted to move things back and forth without being spotted.
Exactly. Yeah.
By any other Navy.
So to continue the journey itself, the route of the Great Loop is once you get to the Hudson River, you go up the Hudson River and into the Erie Canal system, which takes you essentially into the Great Lakes. And obviously you're then in Canada, and you can go across the Great Lakes into the source of the Mississippi River, down the Mississippi into the Gulf of Mexico, and back to Florida. So that's what's called the Great Loop. And it's become quite a phenomenon now. I think in terms of, if you actually did some research on it and Googled quite a bit on it, you'll find hundreds of people's blogs and video journeys. I haven't come across any podcasters yet. I might be the first that's going to be out there podcasting on the Great Loop. But it's an extraordinary maritime adventure. Now, I've wanted to do this for the last couple of years, but I wanted to do it with some kind of humanitarian or philanthropic goal attached to it. And one of the things that I decided to do was to look at what sector of the community today probably needs some support and help more than others. And I've decided that it's young adults between the age of 18 and 21. I think if we look around the world today, a lot of young people are getting disillusioned by the way the world is, whether it be climatically or economically, even politically. A lot of young people are struggling at the end of their school life in terms of realizing what is it I actually want to do in this world. So I've decided to put together a Great Loop project where we take a bunch of random young adults from the age of 18 to 21. They can come from anywhere in the world. So even though that this is a Great Loop in America and Canada, invitations are and applications will be received from people of that age group from anywhere in the world if they can fund themselves to come to North America to start this. Now, this is going to be a project that lasts for several years. I intend on making a TV series out of it, and the TV series is going to focus on the life-changing experience of these people that are going to come on the boat. And obviously, I can't do this by myself, so one of the ways that I'm going to enable additional resources to help out on this project is to invite people like Bob and Elliot from the Traveler's Blueprint to come on the boat for a few days and to be mentors to these young people. And I'm going to be getting mentors from all over the world, from all different backgrounds in business and skill sets, to come on the boat and be a buddy system with these young people. So we're going to buddy up one-on-one, and the mentor is going to teach some life skills or some technical skills or some proficient skills to the person that they're going to be the buddy of. And they may be on the boat for just a few days. They may be on the boat for a month. It depends on availability of the mentor and of course the buddy system. So that's the vision that I have behind this. And obviously I'm bringing my podcast to the United States, and I'm going to be doing my show as I do today, but from my boat in the US. And I'm going to be hopping off my boat and going into cities and towns and festivals and events and all the wonderful places we're going to visit across the Great Loop, and be doing live podcasts from those destinations as we go. So that's what the Great Loop Project's all about.
That is really cool.
Yeah.
I mean, the Great Loop is of itself pretty cool. Something that I never heard of, but I'm very excited. Like, just learned about it. But what you're doing is even more awesome than the whole thing. I mean, and together, the two parts make an even greater whole.
Yeah. So have you figured out where you're stopping yet, or is that still in the planning stages? I'm hoping, like I said in the email to us, we're in like the Philly area. We're in the Philly Atlantic City area. So add that to your list. Make that a stop.
Yes, please make that a stop. And we would be more than happy to help with the buddy
Absolutely.
and the pair system.
Yeah.
Well, that's fantastic. Well, there's no way that I'm going to be coming past Philly without stopping in to see you guys.
Perfect.
So
Excellent.
But it's an important point to talk about the scheduling, and I have run several projects like this around the world throughout my life. And one of the things that I have learned, of the many things I've learned about doing these types of projects, there is a degree of fluidity to it, because you need to understand, first of all, the logistics. Obviously, it's a weather-related project as well. So if we have bad sea conditions, bad water conditions, bad weather in general, then we're not going to be putting anybody's lives at risk. So everything will be flexible to the stage where we say, okay, well, if we have a buddy and a mentor coming on the boat, then their dates need to be fairly rigid in terms of that's when they're available to come on the boat. And they're going to be giving up their time accordingly to be able to come and support the project. So we'll make that happen. But it may mean that rather than doing 500 miles together, we might end up doing 200 miles together because of those other impacting forces. So my goal is now to get rid of the boat that I'm standing on today, talking to you from, get over to the United States and start doing a lot of work on the ground. If I can, for 1 second, I'd just like to share, because people might listen to this and say, how can I get involved? What do you need? And all that sort of stuff, right? So
Yeah.
I recently had communication with the Jacques Cousteau Institute out of New Jersey. And of course, the name and the brand of Jacques Cousteau is phenomenal in terms of maritime history and particularly marine biology. And Jacques Cousteau's son has taken over the organization since his passing. And I've recently just agreed with them a partnership on this project. And one of the fascinating things we're going to be able to do, and this might really play into your hands as well, Bob, as a scientist, but we're going to be doing water quality tests around the Great Loop as we go. And the Jacques Cousteau Institute is going to provide professors and qualified personnel who can actually train young people to do water sample testing and find out about the ecobiology that's going on within the marine environment that we're going to be visiting. So in addition to doing things like podcasts and vlogging and blogging and all these other media skills, we're going to be doing things that have a direct impact on our environment as we're going along. So there's the media side of it, but then there's going to be the practical scientific side, because it's a 6,000-mile journey. That's a long way to go by boat. And there's a lot of things going on in those waterways. If we look at the Mississippi River today, how destroyed is the Mississippi River? Do we even know the whole length of the river and what its ecosystem is actually happening? So I'm very keen to get together with schools, university, colleges across the United States, particular faculties that focus on environmental issues, in addition to film schools and media schools and all those other wonderful institutions out there that can become partners of the project as well.
So Don't test the Hudson unless you want some disgusting. I'm pretty sure the Hudson is classified as a Superfund site.
The whole Hudson River.
Yeah, when I've done projects in New York, when I get my environmental database back that shows hits where they're still doing cleanups, the entire Hudson is just outlined in red.
Wow.
So, you know, and I'm curious about the Schuylkill because I've kayaked the Schuylkill in Philadelphia, and I've always wondered what I picked up in that experience. That's awesome. And so a term that Elliot and I have been hearing pretty recently that I think you might want to add to this is citizen scientist.
Yes.
So yeah, it's a cool term that I keep hearing bounced around, and it's essentially just means that anybody can contribute to science and learn it without having
be
a career
scientist.
in it. Yeah, because you're doing science and
we live in a world of open source and crowdsourced information.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think by doing, you know, I'm a practical guy. I didn't do very well in school like you guys did. So I got out into the world at a very young age, and I used the world as my platform for learning. And as a result of that, there's probably a lot of things that I'm proficient in a lot more than what people have actually gone and studied them, because I've had a practical experience of actually doing it as well. So I'm taking that life experience that I've had, and I'm trying to now impart that on others who have had the same experience at school, and maybe they need to go and do something practical that they're more, first of all, interested in and they get excited about. And who doesn't want to go on a boat trip or have a big adventure around the United States of America? Like, come on, how fun is that? And do some cool things along the way, right?
Absolutely.
It's going to be incredible. That's you need to let me know where you stop.
Yes. And where can we follow you to actually keep up to date on your starting location and the date that you intend to start?
Okay, so there's the Global Travel Channel website. Yep. It's got a page dedicated to the Great Loop Project. It's got the latest information on there right now on how people can get involved and what the latest status is, and a rough timetable on some of the goals that I hope to be achieving. And then on our Global Travel Channel Facebook page, there's also a Great Loop group on that page. So people can join up and interact, and I've already got a great community. There's the American Great Loop Cruiser Association, which is based out of North Carolina. I contacted them about a year ago. They've come on board as a sponsor. They've given me free membership for a couple of years. But the important aspect of that is that they've actually got 14,000 members of the Great Loop community in the United States. And I now have direct access to them when it comes to looking at boats to buy and harbors and marinas to go and stay at, and all these things that are the practical side of the journey as well.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's so neat. I mean, I can't believe I've never heard of it. I know like American geography pretty well, and something that I paid a lot of attention to.
Neither of us are really that into boating, though.
No. I guess that's the thing. So you're gonna do the entire Mississippi River.
Yeah.
And with the actual Great Loop, you intend to do the TV show with it, the documentary of filming it. When do you plan to air that? Will that be the following year while you're doing the next session?
Well, look, there's going to be several angles on that. I'm in contact now with a couple of global travel show distributors to talk about the possibilities and the viability of that, because I want to try and get this to certain platforms where it's actually going to be watched, rather than putting it on a back-end platform somewhere where nobody gets to see it, because I think it is going to be a very inspirational show. It's also going to be a very educational show. I think by a lot of the places that we visit, a lot of the townships along the Great Loop route, a lot of people wouldn't know anything about. They wouldn't know about the history of those places and the significance, the American history and the Canadian history of those townships, and also the amazing inspiring people that we meet along the way. And I've already had people reach out to me and say, listen, I worked on this particular island that's in the Florida Keys somewhere, that's an island owned by the ex-presidents of the United States, and they're the only people allowed to go there, and I used to work there, and I've got all this inside information that I can share with you about this island, and all this sort of stuff, right? So it's like all these people are starting to pop up out of the network. So I see the distribution of this show in the end being on in-flight entertainment systems on airlines. I think that's a great platform to inspire people when they're sitting on a long haul flight and they want to watch a cool TV show. Check out our great loop show on the in-flight entertainment system of major airlines around the world. So that's one of the platforms I'm looking at as well.
All right. Well, before
I have a question for you guys, though. I have another question for you guys.
Yeah.
You've asked me a lot. You've asked me a lot. I've got to fire back. Bob, I'll direct it at you.
Sure.
Have you seen through your talking to your guests on your show an increase of consciousness around sustainable travel and conscious traveling? Is that something that's becoming a bit of a theme on your show?
Big time. Yeah, we actually earlier today we had a podcast completely on sustainable development, but we're seeing a trend in the information that we're absorbing, like the travel articles that we're reading and the people that we're talking to, that there's this eco-tourism that's popping up, and over-tourism is becoming a buzzword and something that people are trying to avoid. Because so many people are traveling now, I think they're realizing that there is a negative effect to it, and there is a negative effect to over tourism and trying to do it in a more environmentally friendly way.
Yeah. And I think we've had several conversations with not all of our guests, but a few of them regarding the impacts of the actual act of travel and how it negatively impacts the environment.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think the most famous recent example is Greta Thunberg sailing back to Europe from Europe to do the climate talks, and I think she was accepting some kind of prize, and she didn't want to fly because of the environmental impact, so she decided to sail.
Right. Yeah. But yeah, ecotourism, I think it just still has a broad term. I honestly wouldn't really know how to nail it down with one definition, but we just read an article that Airbnb, using their booking analytics, was selecting the trendiest places of 2020, and it was completely reliant upon the clicks that they're getting and the bookings that they're getting through their platform. And people are looking to do more eco-friendly locations rather than I guess the more traditional destinations. So people are considering it as they travel.
Definitely.
To the best that they can. It's just such a weird thing to try to figure out, because the carbon footprint you leave when you fly from Philadelphia to Rome, or when you sail around. I mean, we don't have the technology yet to travel in an eco-friendly way. All we can do is preach it and hope that preaching it pushes people to move in that direction. But right now we're kind of at the mercy of the technology we have available.
Yeah, I think there needs to be an air of caution as well when it comes to how this whole philosophy evolves around the world. I think like anything that's new, there's a lot of pioneers, and pioneers are notorious for sometimes running in the wrong direction when it comes to solution providing and all the rest of it. So without that, though, we don't, I guess, end up with the right types of solutions if people don't try things. But I just feel we also need to be a bit mindful of being over trendicizing it, if that's even a word I just made up. But
we'll roll with it.
Trying to make it too cool, like it is relevant. It is something we need to be absolutely conscious of, but don't jump on the bandwagon for the sake of jumping on the bandwagon. Actually walk the talk and do something. And I guess that's just something that comes on my own philosophy.
Well, it ties into, it seems to be trendier with younger people. And it ties into like ecotourism, ties into like voluntourism, where people are trying to get more than just the traditional tourist experience. Hey, look, there's the Eiffel Tower, super cool. Hey, look, let's do the tour of the Roman Colosseum. But they actually want to experience the culture on a deeper level. They want to meet people, they want to talk to people, and they want to actually work sometimes. And, whether it's Elliot worked on a farm in Costa Rica, doing, so I think, I don't want to say people are getting bored with traditional tourism, but with the accessibility of the world to younger people, and with social media where it's just thrown down their throats, you see 100 people at the Eiffel Tower. I think did I just say this? I feel like But you see these pictures over and over again, and it kind of takes away the magic of doing it. And now people are trying to expand on what they can do when they go to these countries, and now they're looking to stay in. They're living with people. We talked to this guy in Peru who his name's Matt, and he has this company called Trek Hoppers Peru. And instead of taking people on the traditional gringo trail to Machu Picchu, he's taking people on a walking tour through the villages, and they actually sleep with the villagers themselves. And the money goes directly to those families, who then are able to buy more food, and you're supporting the community in a more intimate way. And I think that's trending throughout the world, and it's a pretty cool thing to see.
It is.
I'd like to maybe propose to you guys that we actually do another show on volunteerism and have a chat about that. I have quite a lot of extensive experience in that, but I'd like to bounce off a lot of questions on you guys and talking to your guests about it as well. So if you're open to that, then sometime further down the track we could do a show on that, because I think it's a very relevant one for today's travel world.
Yeah, that'd
absolutely.
be great.
Yeah.
Well, as we wrap up, you've already mentioned a few of the places that people can get in touch with you, the Great Loot Project and your Global Travel Channel podcast. What are your social media handles and other locations people can follow you and reach you?
So on Twitter, it's GTC Podcast. That's the handle on Twitter. It's Global Travel Channel on Instagram, and it's Global Travel Channel everywhere else. So Facebook, website, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, all the normal platforms for hosting of podcast shows.
Okay.
Excellent.
I'll send you a list if you like that you can put in the show notes and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And thank you so much for joining us. Evening for us, morning for you. I hope you weather the storm well. I hope Oscar's doing all right.
I have a feeling that we're going to end up talking again in the near future. And I can't wait for you to visit the United States. You have to let us know. It sounds incredible.
It does.
Thank you very much, guys. And a final shout out to all those in Australia impacted by the bushfires at the moment, and sending them all our best wishes and hope for the coming days and weeks and months ahead as well.
Absolutely. Thanks again, Mark.
There we are. That was my appearance on the Traveller's Blueprint podcast show with Bob and Elliot over there in the United States. Those guys doing a great job with their podcast show. Thank you very much, guys, for having me on the show. It was a real hoot. I enjoyed it, and hope all the listeners got some useful information out of that. If you're looking for more episodes from the Global Travel Channel podcast show where I'm not speaking as much, then you can go over to our website and check out www.globaltravelchannel.com. You'll find all of our previous episodes there, and you can download them by going to places like Apple iTunes under the podcast section, places like Stitcher, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Play, and of course the Global Travel Channel Patreon page. Check that out if you haven't already checked it out. Lots of bonus material and content on there. Okay, that's it for this particular bonus issue. I hope you enjoyed it. My name's Mark Philpott. Until we meet again next time, I wish you all a very happy and safe bon voyage.